Welcome to the Office Hours Podcast, Episode 3. What if I told you that companies are making billion-dollar decisions based on data and could still be getting it wrong? Today, we're talking about one of the biggest challenges in modern management, how to make better decisions when you're surrounded by more data than ever before. Because the problem isn't access to information anymore. The problem is knowing what actually matters. I'm joined by Andrew Mozeleski, Senior Director at Circana, where he works directly with companies like PepsiCo, supporting brands you see every day. His job is to take massive amounts of data and help turn it into decisions that drive real business outcomes. What makes Andrew's perspective especially interesting is that he didn't start in data. He came from a background in political science and public policy, and along the way discovered how powerful and even how misleading data can be if it's not used correctly. So in this episode, we talk about the difference between data, information, and insight, and why starting with the right question matters more than the data itself sometimes, and how even the best analytics still require judgment, experience, and context. If you've ever wondered how companies decide what ends up on store shelves, or how leaders avoid getting lost in 14 quadrillion data points, this conversation will give you a clear, practical look at how it actually works. Let's get started.
My name is Andrew Mozeleski. I'm a senior director at Circana. We're a data and AI services company, and my client 100% of the time is PepsiCo. So I get to work with iconic brands like Gatorade and Lay's and Doritos. I've been doing that the last 10 years. I did not start there. I started in undergrad studying political science at UCLA and worked a few years in public policy, both running campaigns and working for the legislature. And then used an MBA to pivot. In grad school, I had an internship for FedEx. And at the end, my manager had told me, she said, I think you're looking for a more data-driven role. And that had never sparked my mind. I'm not a math guy. I'm not a statistics guy. And so the following year of my MBA, I found Circana. And I've been in it ever since. The last 10 years, I'm not a quant. I'm not a statistician. But I've found a passion and a skill set all in this role, and I've been here 10 years, so I must like it and be okay at it.
So it is interesting because you coming from like the political side of things, so that is pretty data driven itself. You're constantly doing polling, and I assume constantly gathering, information from those polls, and then trying to help make decisions that way. So it's not unlike what you were doing before.
No, and I use that in my elevator pitch a lot. Where before I was selling a candidate, now I'm selling a product.
Candy, right? From a candidate to a candy. No, that's awesome. Okay. So you're in your role, you're using data, and I think maybe if you can help me understand like the kinds of data. So you're holding up, Gatorade, and not 10 minutes ago, I'm eating out of a bag of Lay's. So how does that,
Adam?
And do what?
That's a healthy breakfast. I like it.
I probably shouldn't have said that. Nobody knows what time it is. Right? They were dill pickle. I couldn't help myself. But help me understand how you go from, how you turn data into you take consumer data and how you use it. Like, how did I end up with a bag of Lay's in my pantry, and how did you end up with a bottle of Gatorade on your desk, right? There's a lot of data behind that. So can you talk a little bit about how data translates into marketing decisions?
Of course, happy to. It started in the mid-'70s when the barcode was invented. And that allowed for a huge scale of data. When you go to the grocery store, they take the barcode and they ring it across the register. 7 days later, that data is in Circana's database. It is, last I checked, 14 quadrillion data points in our systems. It's a lot. That's
insane.
It's insane. And then on the other side of the coin, so we know everything that's in the store, that's moving, that's selling across most of the U.S. And then we also have a panel of 100,000 folks that we project to the U.S. Census population. And so we know the demographics behind who's shopping. And even to the point where we know what time of day it's being consumed. There will be consumers that eat Lay's for breakfast, and we will pick that up and register it in a consumption database. And so that's what my company does. We purchase all that data, and then we sell it to the folks who sell products in the store. So Frito-Lay knows what goes into the grocery store, what goes into your Kroger, but it doesn't know when it moves. And so they purchase the data, and large accounts like PepsiCo will hire folks like myself to help them use the data in the most efficient way possible. And so I'm attached to brand teams. Lay's was one of them. I just rotated off, but really, they'll come to me with questions. They'll say, "Hey, looking at the different parts of the United States, where should we lean in on?" Or, "Hey, we noticed the business is underperforming expectations. Why is that, and what's driving it?" So I will go into the data, conduct a little investigation, and then come back to them with my findings and results to figure out which marketing levers they could pull to accelerate the business or shift resources to help continue to grow the business.
Yeah. So how does the data, when you say it's captured off of a barcode and it ends up in your, what did you say, 14 quadrillion data points?
Yeah,
How is that much data turned into actionable analytics?
great question. It all starts with the question. When I first started, and I noticed with new hires, we have them explore the data set. And it's rabbit hole upon rabbit hole because there's just so many measures, geographies, brands we have access to. And so if you don't go in there with a working hypothesis, you will be chasing your tail and you won't get to that aha moment, that the key insight everyone's looking for. Um, you have to go in there with a question in mind you're trying to bear out. Is it true or is it false? And then you go from there.
That's really interesting. So, and then your I guess hypothesis is that typically driven by your customer. They're wanting to know, is this true or false? Is it A or B? Or are you also saying, hey, I'm noticing a trend here, and bringing that to the customer's attention as well?
Both. It's more of them approaching us, but we can offer foresights or insights and go to them with it, and they really appreciate that because we're helping them drive the business. And then my company as a whole also offers thought leadership on the broader picture. We were doing a lot of work during COVID. There's a lot of change going on, and so we had some thought leadership coming out to advise client executives, executive leadership to understand what's going on in the broader CPG market.
Hmm. So when you're having to gather all of this data, um, how much how much are you relying only on the data to tell the story, and how much are you relying on experience, whether that's your own experience or your team's experience? Because you are, you're also a consumer of some of those products, and you know people like me who are consumers of those products. So how do you combine experience and analytics and not let one necessarily trump the other?
It's a good question. Um, all the best logic in the world can still lead you to a poor business outcome. You have to understand your business. And that's what I advise my clients a lot of the time. I'll say the data's showing X, but understanding your business structure, the organization might not move in that direction. And here's why. And that's totally reasonable. Um, you have to, each organization is different. And so you have different strengths and weaknesses outside of the data. How do you go to market? Um, what are the consumers doing right now? What's your channel strategy, right? All those inputs come into, okay, well, the data is feeding into that decision, but there's other contexts.
Hmm.
Now, I just say this is different than 30, 40 years ago when data was just starting to inform decision making, and you'd get folks, not that I've been in the industry that long, but from the textbooks saying, no, I got to go with my gut on this one. Well, all the data is showing the opposite. It's not a good strategy. And that's why today I think data is a lot more prevalent than it was years ago.
Yeah. So that's exactly what we're getting after, right? Turning data into insight. So, what do you think is the difference between data, information, and actionable insight?
It's good. Always ask the so what. It says this, so what? What are you going to do with it? And I think that I had to read this big book back in grad school, and it was called The Goal. And I'll summarize the book for you. The goal is to make money, plain and simple. And so it boils it down. That's good. There's information that's good to know and nice to have, but then there's stuff that, hey, this will lead you to to bottom line or top line growth.
Yeah. Yeah, that's I remember that book as well. Uh, all about bottlenecks
Yeah,
and everything. But
yeah.
yeah, you're right. At the end of the day, what's the goal? It's to make money.
And there's
Um,
can I add to that, Adam?
yeah.
I had a very wise client who also works in research tell me. He said, "Hey, you and I are research professionals. Um, we know everything. Pretend our data is like a forest. We know everything about the forest. We know the trees. We know the types of dirts. We know the types of animals. And when a business asks us a question, they need us to guide them through that forest to get to a log cabin, and we want to stop along the way and tell them everything about this mushroom and everything about this caterpillar and everything about this tree. When in reality, they just need us to tag certain trees in the most efficient way possible to get to that cabin. And so it's less is more. And that's what it's taken me many years to figure out. And those are some of the best insights you get to of getting down to the key data points that will really impact the business.
Yeah, I think that's a really good analogy because instantly my first thought when you just mentioned the 14 quadrillion data points is analysis paralysis. You know, and that's kind of what led to this question about trying to think through information and data versus actionable insights. Right? There's so much information, and think you're right. Without having that hypothesis at the very beginning, you don't know where you're going, and you're supposed to be the one clearing the way, right? So, just to play off of your analogy a little more, right? If you don't know how to clear the forest floor and chart the path to that cabin, if you're constantly evaluating every single mushroom and caterpillar and grass type and soil type and tree bark, right? I think that very quickly becomes overwhelming. So let's I want to spin that a little bit because I want to talk about how maybe organizations end up misinterpreting some of the data. When you're collecting that much information, how do you avoid misinterpretation and how do you avoid bias in the data?
It's a good question. It happens. The best practice is to use the data to get to an aha moment, that an insight. The flip side is you already have your decision made and you look for the data to back it up. It happens. I get it. If you're a business strategist, that's sometimes what you need, but it's not preferable. I think to the textbook, right? This imaginary textbook of what would the book say? The book would say use the data to get to your decision and not get to your decision and have the data back you up. Um, the other analysis I have, there's a story. Um, there's a man leaves a bar. He's had a few drinks, and he's looking under the street light for his keys. And some patrons come out. He shouldn't be driving anyway, but some patrons come out to help him find his keys. And he's looking under the street lamp. And so where'd you drop him? I dropped him over there, but this is where the street light is. And we do that a lot in data. Well, this is the data set, and so this is what I'm looking for. And it's like, well, I don't know if you're gonna find that in the data set. Just because you have it doesn't mean it's the golden key for everything. Have you considered an alternative data set or conducting fresh research? And I think that's something we all find ourselves in sometimes.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. How do you or maybe you can even tell me about a time where you've had to make decisions or give advice with maybe incomplete data or ambiguous data. Have you ever come across that situation in your 14 quadrillion data points?
I have, I have.
Interesting, right? That you can have that much information and still have incomplete or ambiguous information.
Yep, we capture everything that goes on inside of the store. Um, we have a media division, but that's not incorporated into our data set on a day-to-day basis. Um, so odds are if something could impact the business that's happening outside, so if there was a media campaign or a ramp up in A&M spending, something went viral, we might not pick it up. Um, a lot of times I advise the client to pick up the phone and call the regional vice president or the field team because they are so close to the business. They know the customers down to the individual stores, store owners, stuff like that. And those they can provide data too in a qualitative format, but they can really tell you in one phone call what's going on with the business in that region. Um, if it's not showing up in the data. And sometimes you'll see twinkles in the data that's hinting at that, and that's why I usually advise them, "This is what I'm seeing. This is what the data shows." But I'd recommend you just pick up the phone and talk to who you can in that area of the country.
That's really fascinating. So you're even without or with that much data, it's still it in some sense it kind of goes back to experience in those instances, right? Your people who are the closest to the end point are the ones who can ultimately inform or color the data a specific way. Um, so I am curious to know how does this data manifest itself, going back to kind of, I guess, coming full circle, how does this data manifest itself to me as the consumer or you as the consumer? And you've collected all this information. What are you looking at? Are you looking at, for the most part, and you don't have to give away trade secrets, but is it product placement? Is it packaging and design? Is it certain colors, flavors? Is it seasonal items? Like what kinds of how does all of this data manifest itself in the sales process?
Good question. A simple one. One of the major brands at Frito-Lay recently changed their packaging up. It was quite a big change. Well, when you have a multi-billion-dollar brand, any little change can negatively impact the performance. And
Uh-huh.
so they use some of our services to conduct a store test, which is really a really complex regression model to where we roll out every other variable in a certain segment of stores, the sample size stores, and through some analytic rigor, we came back 6 weeks later and gave them the thumbs up that this would not hurt the business. And so that's how you see it turn up. Um, you'll see certain companies lean into certain categories because there's been rapid growth there. You'll see flavors pop up. Uh, One thing I do want to say, Adam, data is an insurance policy. If you go off of your gut, let's just say it's a coin flip, 50-50. If you have some data, it m it moves the data to maybe 60-40. You're gonna make a good decision, have a positive business outcome. The more data, um, insures you against making a very bad decision. That margin of error gets smaller and smaller and smaller. PepsiCo is one of the largest, CPG companies in the United States, in the world, so they invest heavily in data. Not everyone has access to those 14 quadrillion data points that my client does, and they're very thorough in it. If there's a question to be asked, it will get asked. And so to make from small decisions to large decisions, we're using data every step of the way and going down every rabbit hole just so they can make the best decision for the business. And that's why PepsiCo is PepsiCo. That's why they have, I think it's 18 $1 billion brands or more. It only in PepsiCo is a small brand $300 million.
Yeah. Yeah, that's just insane. Um, can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing? So this is a podcast or whatever geared towards young professionals. Can you talk about what you're seeing even in the job market? What should young professionals understand about using data well? Where should they be focusing maybe some of their additional training efforts if they're still in school, or maybe they've just graduated or just started a career and only a year or two into it? What does the future look like? What's happening to data right now?
That's a good question. I've noticed it in my 10 years at Frito-Lay supporting the client. Um, those folks that were early in their career that learned how to use data properly are now directors and senior directors and will probably be executives here in the next few years. They know the business inside and out, starting as an analyst, fresh out of undergrad. And here they are 10 years later making very important decisions, managing very large businesses because they were the ones in the data. Um, Building the Excel scorecards, doing the boring grunt work, but they were able to speak to it to executives in meetings and know the business inside and out, and they've really stood apart. The other bit I would say is, um, get well read into data, but also AI. I don't know where that's going to go, but I do know that it's like I've been telling this to my kids, it's like a calculator. in school, you still have to learn how to do the math with a pen and paper, even though in the real world, you use a calculator. And even you don't use a calculator anymore, you use Excel. But you have to know what's going on behind it. And so AI is great, but you have to know what to ask it. And so learning how to use data, you still need to, I think, do the coursework of of understanding what an insight is. How do you communicate that? How do you write that down? Take your data and put it into a presentation? How do you sit down and tell a story through it? Right? And then AI is just going to accelerate that and make it even better. But if you don't have those foundations, um, I don't think you'll be set apart as much as those who have. I used to lie about my work. People would ask me what I do for a living, and I would say I work in marketing at Frito-Lay. That was the easy pitch. But the more I've gone into it and built a career out of it, I'm really proud of my company, Circana, just formerly IRI. Um, but it's a good career path. We're in data. We're at the cutting edge of AI. We're one of the largest market research firms in the United States. If you like if you like a brand, odds are Circana is their data provider, and you can either work directly for that company, or work as I do as a contractor, or really a long-term partner. And it's really neat to be a part of a team and really help the business. There are several things I can look back on that I had a part to play, and it's really neat to have that impact as a market research professional. Um, and don't let lack of quant skills or a mathematical background hinder that. I when I got into grad school, they put the range of scores for our tests up on the board, and I set the bottom on the quant side of things. And here I am working in data, and I can do math really quick in my head now. So I've come a long way. So to all the students out there, um, your weakness might not be a weakness. Training and experience can do wonders. And so, um, if you have a and if you have an interest in research or data, uh, reach out to Adam and he'll get you in touch with myself. I love guiding and talking and mentoring new students. Just had a conversation the other day with a guy who's looking to get into it.
Well, thanks so much. I really, truly appreciate it. And thanks for your time. And I know there's going to be a lot of people who benefit from this, and really does mean a lot that you took the time today. Thank
Absolutely.
you.
Thanks for asking, Adam. I appreciate it.